Hey, CNFers. Creative Nonfiction Podcast is sponsored by Scrivener. Scrivener was created by writers for writers. It brings all the tools you need to craft your first draft together in one handy app. Scrivener won't tell you how to write. It simply provides everything you need to start writing and keep writing. I'm using it for my Casualty of Words podcast and the book, which I will eventually turn into an ebook, and you can do it all with Scrivener. So, whether you plot everything out first or plunge in, write and restructure later, Scrivener works your way.
I try to read pretty continuously, fiction and nonfiction. I definitely find that important and kind of feeds into keeping me wanting to do this. I see how other people have pulled it off so ingeniously, and I think I'm gonna keep this up as a practice because it can be so exciting when it works.
What is up, CNFers? This is the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, the show where I talk to badass writers and filmmakers. Sometimes we try about the art and craft of telling true stories. I'm Brendan O'Mara. Hey, welcome to it. Be sure you're subscribed to the show wherever you get your podcasts, and keep the conversation going on social media at CNF Pod across the big three. You dig? You dug? Good. Today's guest is Stephanie Gorton. She's the author of Citizen Reporters, SS McClure, Ida Tarbell, and the magazine that Rewrote America. We'll get to her in a moment to talk about the sacrifices she made, midwifing books through writing her own until she was able to write her own, and what she learned from the process of writing and researching this magnificent book. A little update here on the CNF Pod audio mag on isolation. I'm in the process of editing the essays that made the cut, and we'll be sending those back to the writers to record. It is happening. I'm stoked to put it together. It's going to take some serious sweat. But what the hell else am I going to do? Why not throw myself into yet another portal to another dimension and see what comes out the wormhole? The newsletter has been coming off hot on the presses lately. Coming off the presses hot? I don't know. Shoot, this isn't a good advertisement for my own newsletter. Damn. Anyway, you're going to want to subscribe, right? By heading over to BrendanO'Mara.com, hey, to subscribe to it, reading recommendations, writing tips, and what you might have missed from the world of the podcast. All subscribers are entered in raffles to win books. I get a lot of books, and what kind of guy would I be if I hoarded them all? So as long as you stay on the list, yeah, you're perpetually entered in the raffle. First of the month, no spam, can't beat it. Now, I don't know about you, but I've put on some serious pandemic poundage as I've had to dial in like my meal plan quite a bit and up the exercise, which is something I feel confident I can do. But maybe I just got to cut back on those craft brews. My wife and I try to, when we're really humming, we try to adopt an or mentality. You can have beer or ice cream. You can have beer or a chocolate bar. Not and. And there's been a whole lot of and. Especially coming off the birthday weekend, which is great because calories don't count on a birthday. Nah, nothing counts. It's all good. And we had a wonderful, wonderful time. It was freaking cool. We camped at Soda Creek near Bend on the scenic Cascade Byway under the shadow of the South Sister. Got up at 4:30 one morning to watch the sunrise. It was like 30 degrees, and it was great. Watch the sunrise and shine on that volcano along the Ring of Fire. Pretty cool stuff. Saw a deer out in the field, and it looked at me like, what is that? No matter. So we did some brewery hopping in Bend, had a killer vegan pizza at the Chutes Brewing. It was one of those pizzas where it wasn't like the vegan thing on the menu was an afterthought. It was actually made with some care. And apparently one of the sous chefs is vegan, so he knew what was up, and he did it, and it was delicious. And then we replicated that pizza when we got home that weekend, and it was also delicious. Anyway, wife got me a ton of cool Metallica swag, a Metallica journal, a vinyl of Master of Puppets, a cool pin to go on my Master of Puppets Billabong jacket that I got when I was in Maui. And a bandana. It's got a black bandana with all Metallica shit all over it, and I wear it when I'm working out, and it's cool, and I'm badass. That's what you think of when you think of me, right? A certifiable badass. One last thing, or two last things, few last things. Speaking of the birthday, thanks a lot for birthday wishes, because it went out on the 1st of the month, and that's my birthday, July 1st, and a lot of you replied back, and it was really nice. It was really super sweet to hear the great birthday wishes. I deeply appreciate it. It was really cool and thoughtful, and lit my day up. Totally made me feel good. But I should also mention that this podcast is also brought to you by Casualty of Words, my writing podcast for people in a hurry. It's just me talking like this about writing as I plod through the rewrites of the thing I'm doing. Episodes are under 3 minutes. It might just be the snack you need to help with your work. And speaking of work, if you're going to get in better shape, you hire a personal trainer, right? It's worth it. If you want your essay or book to have some abs, not just a six-pack, maybe you want that 8-pack, the coveted 8-pack that Lego Batman has. I'd love to help you get you and your work where you need to go. So if you're ready to level up your work, I'd be honored to help. Email me, Brendan at brendanomeara.com, hey, and we'll start a dialogue to get you where you need to go. So, okay, enough about me, enough rambling. Here's my conversation with Stephanie Gorton. You know what to do. In the Lovecraft,
the Necronomicon, right?
Necronomicon, yeah. Like, how did you come across that as a story? And how did you come across that?
Providence is what's sort of great is that there aren't that many degrees of separation between yourself and any person or enterprise you're kind of interested in after you've lived here for a few years. And this is now my 7th year here, which is kind of unbelievable. You just sort of start seeing people again and again. It's really, maybe less like a city and more like a very large neighborhood or a borough would be in a metropolis. So I saw that this was going on. I thought it would make for a good story, and the people who were organizing it were very open to talking and to giving me access to different events. I had a kind of a soft spot for the whole, and maybe I should say I was more curious about what the whole thing was. I have a brother who's always been a Lovecraft reader and into weird fiction, and I just sort of thought, well, I haven't seen him in a long time, and maybe this is a way to like be among his people and try to like find out more about what he sees in Lovecraft and in the Lovecraftian other worlds. And sure enough, that's kind of what I found. There's a whole community around these stories, and that community has made up this, the series of events and rituals and celebrations. And they're very, upfront about the dark side of Lovecraft, about his bigotry, about his narrow-mindedness. At the same time, they kind of embrace and definitely celebrated that otherworldly aspect and took over the town in a way that was really, really fun. Providence has, it's not like a wealthy city by any means. There are quite a few decaying buildings and empty parking lots right downtown. And to have a festival purely focused on the weird take over the city for a few days was really pretty special. And being somebody who's maybe not a natural party goer, my next best thing is, well, I should write about it. I should insinuate myself in there or make it my job to be there. And it was one of those pure strokes of luck where I sent some cold pitches around, and the New Yorker page turner blog was running pieces like that at the time, um, and that's how it worked out.
Now, did you have access to this subculture before you started pitching, or did you what was the
Not at all.
workflow there?
Not at all. I saw that it was happening, and it's a literary event happening in the town where I live, so it was on my radar. But I had to do quite some research um, to familiarize myself with who Lovecraft was, the important um, elements of his work, why he was so important to this community of people. And fortunately, at the time, one of the libraries here was having an exhibit of his letters, so I could go and dig through his handwritten letters to other writers. He was an incredibly voluminous letter writer and really creative, obviously. I mean, I don't know why I even said that. Um, so there was a lot to learn, both before I started writing the piece and before the convention happens. You don't want to show up and only have clueless questions on your notebook. And you also want to, hopefully be able to instill in the people you're interviewing a sense of affinity, that you're, even if you're not one of them, even if you didn't travel from across the country or across the world to come to this convention, you're there for the celebration as much as they are.
And when you were cold pitching, how did you go about finding the right person to pitch this story to, and make sure that it was a fit for a page turner, but also for that particular editor?
I had no familiarity with the editor or with the editor I pitched to, and I had read Page Turner for some time. And I'd noticed a piece a couple weeks earlier that I thought structurally was a good comparison. So I tried to highlight in my pitch, this thing is happening. And I do realize that, an event or a topic is not a story. So I made sure in my pitch to say this thing is happening, and my story would follow the similar lines to this article that you ran pretty recently, just to show that I knew who I was pitching and could give them an idea of what to expect, of what the narrative would look like. And there's really nothing admirable about how I found the person to pitch to. I think I did some Googling and I figured out what the Condé Nast email format was like, and fired it off to a handful of people, guessing at their email addresses, having no idea if it was really reaching them.
Yeah, I did that too. I pitched a feature and I kind of guessed around to what David Remnick's email would be, and
Mm-hmm.
I did. I actually hit that bullseye. The story was, of course, rejected, but I actually I got to the man, and
Yeah.
for some reason he read the pitch. I don't know why. I must get like 4,000 a month, if not more.
Right.
But yeah, so it's funny how sometimes these rejections can be kind of like a crowning achievement in a lot of ways. So.
Exactly. Yeah, that's so true.
I liked what you said a few moments ago when we were first talking, that you were in publishing and then you moved to writing. What was that transition like for you? And maybe did you feel like when you were sort of in book publishing, that was what maybe Julia Cameron might call a shadow career? Like you really wanted to be on the field versus in the dugout?
That's interesting. I didn't come to it from that approach. I had spent maybe a decade working in book publishing, generally working for smaller independent presses, acquiring and editing both fiction and nonfiction. I worked for a company called Canongate Books in the UK, and then once I moved to New York, I was with an academic journal, and then with the Overlook Press, and then with a more digital focused company called Open Road. And since working in-house and alongside, I've continually freelanced doing developmental editing for other writers. The move to writing came from, I had been doing this for some time and loved it. But I had this kind of, I think I was having one of those periodic crises. And to me, around the age of 30, it wasn't so much, what is the rest of my life going to look like, relationship wise? Am I going to have kids or not? I was sort of very, very much not focused on the things that maybe I should have
Mhm.
been focused on there. I thought, ever since I was a kid, I thought writing would be part of my life, that I would be somebody who like documented stuff and learned it and wrote things down. And instead, I am this kind of midwife to other people's writings, sort of sometimes feeling like a gigantic, like all consuming filter for other people's words. And it was a line of work that I loved and really enjoyed. But there was a sense of that I had let down my younger self and ought to find a way to make writing, at least in some way, a part of my life. I didn't necessarily see it as a profession. I think I'd seen um, how so many writers made it work and how rare it was for it to be, your bread and butter. So I had worked with two people who had come through the creative nonfiction MFA program at Goucher College in Baltimore. One writer, Carrie Hagan, who wrote this fabulous true crime book called We Is Got Him about the first ransom kidnapping in America. And then a colleague, Kelsey Osgood, whose memoir I thought was really pretty stunning. Um, and we were friends, and the way that they spoke about this program made me think, I should do that. I would really enjoy that. As you know, it's a low residency MFA program, and is very community focused. It seemed to be set apart from how you would typically think of an MFA program, in that rather than coming out of it with this kind of fraught rivalry with the other writers around you, people went back year after year just to see one another, and that people were doing writing swaps and supporting each other long after the end of the program. uh, and the faculty were really pretty amazing. Um, so that's what brought me. Goucher was the only program that I applied to. I also loved the fact that it was low residency and I could figure out a way to make a living around graduate school. That was important.
Nice. And when you proclaimed that, you at least had an awareness that not making writing your bread and butter, do you think that having that sort of proclamation about your writing has given you a more healthy relationship with it, in a sense that you're not maybe not as bitter as and resentful as you potentially could if you were really hanging your shingle on it?
Maybe I have friends and people I met through Goucher whose writing where writing is their bread and butter. Generally they're journalists, and I think you are made of tough stuff. And I think I just recognized that after so many years working in book publishing, I had grown used to a different rhythm of work and felt I was trained differently and wasn't comfortable jumping fields entirely. So I definitely I find research and writing for book projects a pure joy. And there have been a few times when different genres have been suggested to me, write a short form piece, write a kind of um, a spin-off piece from a smaller story in your book, or even an op-ed about, the state of journalism then and now. Things that I find extremely uncomfortable and have really opened my eyes to and what a challenging field it is to express yourself on the page in a really concise, shorter form, and then turn around the next day and do it all over again. My my work takes months, if not years, to come together, and that is, I find like such a luxury.
And very young Stephanie, who always thought that maybe there would be a career in writing, or what were you reading at the time? At that time, and what was inspiring you to be like, yeah, you know what, this is like, if I'm not going to let my older self down, this is kind of the stuff that I feel like getting into.
Right. It's very much this stuff for many writers, I think, comes along in childhood, as much as you don't want to admit it and think, oh no, once I was independent and my own person, I willfully put myself on this path. And of course, on the surface, that is what happened. But I grew up in a household that was just full of books, and both of my parents are pretty immersed in history, and we grew up, you know, going to museums constantly. Every vacation revolved around an archaeological site. There was just this sense that the stories of the past were like the big thing, and could explain so much about what we saw around us now. So that was a big influence, and also instilled, probably a hunger for understanding and a curiosity to research the past. I have to give them much of the credit.
And I like when you wrote in it's probably the prologue of your recent book too, that you wrote, I often wondered what makes a writer write, knowing their work will likely be lost to the years. And what was your headspace around that sentence?
I'm glad you asked that, because there's a part that hasn't gotten much airtime, maybe a facet that hasn't gotten much attention, which is really my own fault as I talk about this book. But the whole business of storytelling is such a strange thing. And I was in such a position of privilege to start in as like intern, assistant, very traditional, moving up the rungs of the terribly paid world of book publishing. And you spend so much time just reading unsolicited submissions. I have spent months where most of my time is just reading work that receives a rejection letter. It's dispiriting, and it's also just sort of stunning to think people are still doing this because they have to, and they're putting themselves out there. So that, I think, found its way into the book, in that the creative collaboration I found between Samuel McClure and Ida Tarbell also relied on this, the sense where she wanted to be there so badly, and needed to make herself self-sufficient, and wanted to make writing her profession. And in a way, this opened the both of them up to this almost exploitative and definitely codependent working relationship. And that's how stories emerge into the world, or at least that's how, the dysfunctional system of the way the media works has evolved so far. So I think, there was that definitely came from a deep experience and a deep kind of like, I wonder if this will ever change, and if the system of gatekeeping, of assessment, of people trying to make themselves heard, and that mysterious process where, what voices actually make it, was something I was thinking about a lot.
There was a point too in the book. I think there was this poem that you cited. I think it was called the Cynic. It was written in Town Topics.
Yes.
It just like, it harkens so bad to today with social media, and I was just like, oh my god, I can't believe this withering editorials about potentially disastrous self-absorption of a new generation. I was like, all right, 100 years later, and here we are, even more self-absorbed than we ever were.
Right. Yeah, to think like the fact that the handheld camera hitting the market, and becoming like a fashionable accessory for young people, made others like kind of wring their hands and think, oh, the youths are so self-absorbed. They're only taking pictures of themselves, like posing, attitudinizing, I think was the word they used.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe that.
Yeah, that must have been just been so wild when you came across that and be like, holy shit, they're basically
Yeah.
talking about selfies in the early 1900s or whenever this thing was actually written.
Yeah. And I was talking about it with a friend who's a photographer, and she was sort of saying, yeah, the camera has been this kind of like object of suspicion since the beginning, and somehow it has never really been able to shake off this status of being like not quite art and not quite above board.
Yeah, and it was funny, like yesterday, because the weather's been nice out here of late, and I was just in my ways to take a break from the screens of the day,
Mm.
and I was going outside, and I have this nice little apple tree in the yard, and I was like, oh, I'll go out and read in the shade. That's kind of like one of my favorite things to do. And one of the first things that came to my mind was, oh, is this like an Instagrammable thing? I'm like, what the hell is wrong with you? Why am I going to take a picture of like the tree in my shadow and say like, this is where I'm reading right now? It's just like the insidious idea that these things have to somehow be Instagrammable or tweetable or shareable in
Right,
some way. I was just so like beleaguered by this notion that that this idea came into my head that in order for this moment to exist, I must put it digitally out into the ether. It was like really
right.
disturbing. Like, do
Yeah,
you wrestle
no,
with
it's
that at all?
yeah, absolutely. And sometimes I wonder how, what the world would be like if like some mysterious entity could like collect everybody's like tweets that they never tweeted, like the 140 character um expressions where they were like, oh, I would really like to put that out there right now, or that expresses how I really feel, but it becomes a whole unsaid catalog. And then there's, the stuff that is said, which you could scroll through all day long and never reach the end of it. Um, so that, I've really tried to dial back on social media generally, and I think the past few months, and especially COVID, um, have kind of cemented that as a habit, just because there aren't that many even minutes in a day, never mind hours, with childcare being unavailable, and two people who are trying to do jobs from the same room. Um, but that's one thing that just has to fall by the wayside.
Yeah,
But
and
this I think when you do I personally would have loved to see your picture reading from under the apple tree. I think it's just nice to see what your friends and your contacts are doing. Like I kind of appreciate that other people are invested in it.
yeah, it's such an odd thing. Like I just some things that kind of grate on me are like these really romantic versions of what it means to live a writing life. Like these,
Ugh.
they kind of just irritate me and grate at me, and because it's not if when you're really in it, it's an ugly slog. It's
Mhm.
not this picturesque thing seen through a filter with a desk overlooking some valley. It's often just you're in the grind of the cave, and it's ugly and boring, and it's a
Mhm.
slog above all else, and I don't see that enough. And to put something out there that seems almost, I don't know, curated in a way that's not true, those things kind of grate at me. And I was like, if I took a picture of this tree and me reading under it, it
Mhm.
seemed like I'd be feeding into this thing I've come to loathe.
Right, right. It's funny though, at the same time, when you do find yourself like reading a beautifully produced hardcover book in like natural dappled light, I don't, and you're like, this is such a grabbable moment. You think I've like grasped one of those brass rings of like life. Like I just fell into this moment. I didn't even do it on purpose. I have to set it down right now. Like it happened to me too, guys. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I've taken to the at least just the last couple weeks of In the evening, especially, I've really come to put my phone in this little basket that I have where my car keys are.
Hmm.
And I only have it there for phone calls or maybe a text if I'm really expecting a text. And I found that it's almost like when Frodo takes the ring off in Lord of
Yeah,
the Rings, and it's just like all of a sudden this weight is lifted.
right.
It's really bizarre when you really untether yourself from it that, yeah, there is a phantom limb element of it. But at the same time, when you kind of take a deep breath, it's like, oh, I feel lighter. I feel a
Yeah.
whole lot better.
Yeah, yeah. And then your brain starts casting around for like, oh, what other thing can I consume? And then often you end up, reading something you wouldn't have, maybe absorbed if you were just scrolling through it.
Yeah. So, and with respect to the writing and the reading that you do, what books have you turned to that to kind of that might have maybe informed Citizen Reporter or it just informed the kind of writing you like to do? Like, what do you turn to for that kind of inspiration?
There, I try to read pretty continuously, fiction and nonfiction. Is that I definitely find that important and kind of feeds into keeping me wanting to do this. I see how other people have pulled it off so ingeniously, and I think I'm gonna keep this up as a practice because it can be so exciting when it works. Citizen Reporters came out of coming across these characters again and again in other books that I really enjoyed, but not finding a book that was solely about them. And one of, I think, the clearest inspiration or the most immediate ancestor is the kind of majestic tome, The Bully Pulpit by Doris Kearns Goodwin, which is a presidential history of Theodore Roosevelt and William Howard Taft. But the Muckrakers and McClure's magazine specifically are an important subplot. I also found other narrative histories that I kind of gobbled down and had these like short and tantalizing mentions of the characters in the book came along in works by Jill Lepore and Eric Larson. So, writers of history with very different approaches, and popular books that millions of people read. And I was kind of one of those general interest readers who thought I want this book that's only about this group of journalists and what they did, and not only one story that they focused on, whether it was a murder or an invention or a political campaign, but the full range, the reporting, what was happening in fiction at the time, and maybe that can give a, a new lens onto what was happening in those years, which have been expertly covered by many, many other historians. And that's kind of what got me inspired toward this specific subject. At the beginning, I was working on the ensemble cast of the magazine staff, and then as I worked longer and longer, having 4 or 5 major characters and that web of relationships, I wasn't finding a way to manage it, and that felt right, and that felt like I was really invested in all of them and could convince a reader to be that way. It was the tension between McClure and Tarbell that really got me. And Tarbell as a maybe I should call her like the surrogate here, the surrogate main character, the hero of the story. Uh, she's the one who ends up taking over. Um, and that's yeah, so that really governed the shape of the book from discovering the topic in other works to figuring out who would be the characters through which the story could be told.
So when you're living among these dead people that you're able to write about, what was it like for you, and what was that feeling to come across the fact that you've seen them as gold coins in other stories, but nothing cohesive on their own? What was that like, that moment of discovery like for you when you realized that you could be the one to put your finger on that story above and ahead of other people?
I wonder, I imagine um, a lot of people have had to put this thought out of their heads as they pursue a project. But as a writer, and especially one who's not in a formal field, I do not have a PhD. Um, you do have to spend a lot of your time just blocking out the thought that you're not qualified to do this. And there are like rich and wonderful singular biographies of McClure, of Tarbell, absolutely. There's a great book by the journalist Steve Weinberg called Taking on the Trust, which focuses even more narrowly on Tarbell's uh, series on Standard Oil and John D. Rockefeller. But my interest was driven towards this creative collaboration that they had and the wider cultural circle. I hadn't seen that brought together in a story, and these characters hadn't gotten some attention for a while, at least a solid decade. Uh, I did feel, I had to convince myself and an agent and eventually an editor, but that there's a place for this story, and that it could be, maybe it was an advantage that it wasn't scholarly history. Maybe it was a good thing that this was, one general interest, slightly obsessive researcher speaking to like-minded readers.
When there's a lot of biography written about these main characters and even memoirs, what becomes the challenge for you to filter and curate that material so it doesn't just feel like you're regurgitating what's already been written? So you're writing something that feels wholly new and original, even though it's coming from a well of material that's already been written, if that makes any sense at all.
No, that's really important. And the key thing for me is drawing as much as possible from primary sources and being really stringent about starting from the primary sources. Secondary sources need to be covered and need to be included, but you don't want your book to be derivative, um, or to lack a narrative voice of its own. Um, I don't think I discovered anything groundbreaking in the archives. There were probably some small stories where my analysis of what happens doesn't necessarily line up with what other historians have put together. But um, but starting from the characters' voices as they are in their own written records, their memoirs, the drafts of their memoirs, their letters, the private reminiscences that friends have put together about them, that uh, that was the backbone for sure.
And I love how you wrote about Tarbell that her ambition from a young age had been to achieve independence and a thriving intellectual life. And nothing she experiences since, or experienced since, it might be a typo on my part, since taking her vow of spinsterhood at 14 prompted her to seriously rethink that choice. I love this, that she basically took this vow of spinsterhood, a vow of writinghood, if you will. Like there was
Right.
nothing that was going to get in her way.
Mm.
What was that like coming across her and meeting her and spending time with her, and the fact that she had this singular vision from such a young age?
That was, I worked on the project for a little over 5 years, about a part of 6 years, and encountering, trying to evoke Ida Tarbell was one of the biggest challenges. She was just this, almost at first seemed like this incredibly rare and probably too good to be true uh, character whose voice is just so cohesive from her teenage years, from her letters when she's very young, all the way through. She's one of those people who never took fame seriously. She was never in it for public attention. She was extremely absorbed in the work for its own sake. And because of that, because her vision was so trained on the reporting and the writing she was doing for McClure's magazine, she ended up, making a kind of moral occupation of it, of saying, no, I will not um, write out unsubstantiated claims. If a source tells me one thing, I will try my hardest to confirm it elsewhere. I'm not going to accept gifts or even a glass of milk from my sources. She invented that. That was not the norm in the mainstream journalism at the time. So discovering Tarbell was, really like um, this kind of experience to me of someone who you think, she's interesting, sure, she did some important stuff. It's probably going to be dry when I start digging into it. And then instead, it's this wellspring of of voice and freshness and stories that you don't want to put down. Um, she absolutely had her complications. She was against women's suffrage for much of her career. And that I found made things more interesting. There was nothing expected about how her opinions on that front played out. It was a hard-won effort to convince her. And it was only after women did achieve the right to vote that she came around to thinking, oh, sure, it's self-evident. They should have the right to vote. Um, so there is not a, a neat little box that Ida Tarbell can fit into in the historical record. But there's what she created within the field of journalism. There's her unusualness in refusing, rejecting a family life and sticking to that, uh, and um, and making her career the focus of her life. And then there's her kind of ability to shift and change her mind and be different people over the course of her life.
Yeah, and then there's of course the charismatic publisher and editor of McClure, the namesake of the magazine, who
Mm.
wrote, "I can imagine why your people should think that I would remain poor. The reason why so many think me egotistic is this: I talk of my plans in a straightforward way, and I do things with assurance and success that they imagine to be conceit. Don't fear, I'll get what I want, and you may depend on it."
Yeah.
I mean,
You
like
can just,
what a voice, right?
what a guy, right? And he, McClure came from nothing, from a dirt floor house in rural Ireland, and I, starved through his first winters in Indiana once his widowed mother immigrated there with her 4 sons. It's just this story where you think so much was set against him. There was no reading material in their house apart from, Bible, Pilgrim's Progress, and his stepfather's agricultural catalogs eventually. But he made this myth of himself from the point he left home. He started working his way through a college education, and he realized that he really had a way of speaking about himself that was very convincing to others. So he married way above his station, and after scrambling together a living as like a bicycling instructor and freelancer and editorial assistant, he goes down and starts a literary syndicate in New York City and eventually launches his own magazine. But a big part of this was he was constantly telling his own story as a rags to riches story, way before he attained any riches at all. And it worked. He was this outsider who broke into a world that was already kind of like a fossilized elite media world of a handful of renowned New York magazines, Harper's, Scribner's, and The Century, and one kind of patrician Boston magazine, The Atlantic Monthly. Um, and he just barged on in there with McClure's, you know, had this editorial vision for picking out exceptional writers. He called it, finding great wine without the labels. He would read constantly, um, and that's how he ended up recruiting Ida Tarbell and Jack London, Theodore Dreiser, Arthur Conan Doyle. There was just this incredible roster of names that he put in his magazine from a very early point. Um, and then he also put a very low price on his magazine so that it would be appealing to a huge readership. And that's, that was the bedrock for his success. But way before he achieved it, he was talking about it. He was a master of spin.
There was something very Gatsby-esque about his rise and fall, wasn't there?
Mm, yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that came not just from his career and his editorial eye, but from his the way he told his own personal story, and would kind of trot out his wife and children as evidence of him making good and being a solid gentleman. They moved to a pretty grand house north of the city, and he would go to Europe at least once a year. He was very conscious of having the kind of like accoutrement that would broadcast to the world, I'm somebody to be reckoned with.
And I like too, of course, those are your two figurehead characters, but there's also somebody like a Lincoln Steffens
Mm.
who said like care like hell, sit around the bars and drink and pose and pretend all you want to, but in reality, deep down underneath, care like hell. I love that. I love that sentiment.
Yes, and that McClure's was really just a small episode in his larger career. So I zoom in on it because McClure's is my topic, but Steffens is a really fascinating character, and I hope that readers who take a liking to him from reading the book can go and look at everything else that he wrote and did, because yeah, he also, although he came from maybe a much more typical background for a journalist at that time, from this very wealthy California family, educated at Berkeley and then in Europe, and then finally kind of grudgingly took up a day job because his family money was cut off. He made something so great out of it, and you don't run across that story all that often.
Was he the one that McClure said like when he ran across him later in life, that he was like, my friend, the enemy. Was
Yes,
that
I
him
think
or is
that
that
was
somebody
him.
else?
Yeah, and they had such an interesting relationship. They were both, small statured men, not, 5.5 feet. They looked each other right in the eye, and they constantly sniped at each other. So Lincoln Steffens would say of McClure, like all dictators have short necks or something like that. And and McClure really enjoyed ragging on Steffens and telling him his articles were unacceptable, and they would have these kind of ferocious tussles. As McClure, for all his editorial vision, also had this expression of never originate if you can imitate. He really wanted his magazine to sell. And if another magazine was selling many copies with a particular story, say a series about Abraham Lincoln or about the great corporate trusts, he would say, well, we have to do the same thing and commission a series on exactly the same topic. And it worked for him. Whereas Steffens, I think,
Mhm.
would have been more of an original, of a radical, loved to put forth theories that maybe leaned on the academic or the analytical side in his work. And that was not what McClure was in it for at all.
And I know that Ida, her big thing, her favorite thing to dive into was to write these great narrative histories of the dead. She didn't like necessarily living in the present, say covering Rockefeller, even though there was a bone to pick there.
Mm.
I wonder if with like respect to her story on Lincoln, which really kind of put her on the map. I wonder if like maybe you saw a lot of you in her and the fact that you wrote this kind of history. You're looking back from this century to last century, and she was often in early 20th century looking back on the 19th. So did you see that kind of parallel between you and her and like the taste that you two shared?
I did not see a lot of parallels between myself and Ida Tarbell. I think I love the way how bluntly she put it, that she wanted to write about the dead, that she liked dead people, that she preferred
Yeah.
to, research them and go through their legal records and go to their home state and interview their relatives and their friends and their old teachers. Um, but, you kind of get the sense that she was pushed to really against her limits and pushed to develop as a journalist because she had to write about a living subject eventually. Um, and it exhausted her. She was supposed to write 3 articles on Standard Oil. She ended up writing 19. And she talks about the kind of bitter feeling that she got of having to pursue Rockefeller, deal with the fact that he was avoiding her, the necessity of writing a profile of him regardless, and having to kind of sneak around just to be in the same geographical location as him and take a few notes, which he ended up going to his local church near Cleveland and observing him through the service.
Yeah.
She was very open about the fact that it gave her a bad feeling, that she did not enjoy it, she didn't relish it, but the work she produced was, you know, groundbreaking. Um, so I think following that trajectory, you can kind of take a lesson from it, that for somebody whose life was so much about the work, she was glad that she had done it, even if she didn't actually enjoy doing it.
I like too that you cite these. With Thomas Jefferson, like there's the famous quote that he loves. He wants a country with newspapers, and everyone
Mm.
espouses that. But then 20 years later, you cite that he also said, like, nothing can now be believed which is seen in a newspaper. Truth itself becomes suspicious by being put into the polluted vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
And almost the same was true as Roosevelt. He was built up by the media and then equally criticized by it, and then we see how these people in power, they use it, and then one point they try to undercut it.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. And I think there's this delusion that maybe people on the up and up politically have, that they are on top of the press, or that they have kind of instinctive sway over the press, and the press is not its own entity. And it has never worked out for anybody.
Right.
But the parallels can be so strongly felt today, that there's also that Oscar Wilde epigraph of, an administration rules for 4 years, but journalism reigns forever and ever. I'm paraphrasing, but I thought that was illustrative also, uh, that a president will never, I wonder if they would ever be able to sustain a congenial or even civilized relationship with the press at this point in our culture, at this point in time, um, and certainly not the situation we're looking at now.
Yeah. There was a point too in the book where you cite, I don't know if it was an essay, but it was something called the fettered clam, and
Mm,
I like this. And we'll read this short little passage. It's like the comic, or something of the metaphor made sense in a way. Suddenly, readers were hyper aware that in the magazines they devoured daily, events were not merely reported but mediated into a narrative, filtered through a reporter's mind like brackish water through a bivalve. And it got me thinking, like, these days, especially with social media and the way that prominent people, athletes, celebrities, you name it, these people that used to rely on Esquire or GQ or
hmm
you name it for their coverage, now they can kind of control the narrative themselves. So it's all the more harder and challenging to write about these people. And it's like, if you're in that position of power, why would you even want to trust a reporter to write your story when things could be slightly filtered and shaped in a way that's not entirely flattering?
mm. Yeah, and you definitely see that, you know, looking at how magazines have fared, uh, from the Gilded Age, which was maybe the golden age of the magazine, and then after the upswing of radio and television, when magazines really suffered, then maybe in the 60s and 70s, when Esquire and Rolling Stone and other magazines really came back, um, and there was this hunger again for long form magazine writing, uh, and now they're also, I for one don't think they're they're going to be back anytime soon. Um, you do see that waxing and waning of, do I need uh, the gatekeeper to post this for me, or can I just post it directly myself? And there are, maybe fewer and fewer gatekeepers who are trusted, but also I I feel like readers and listeners and viewers um, are much more informed and selective. Maybe that's completely naive of me, um, but that there are different ways to access those stories, and that you can find the voices that you trust, and that ask the questions that you would ask, and that that at least is one huge advantage of the communication revolution.
Yeah, and what kind of sucks these days too is like with you're seeing this all the time with documentaries, especially featuring say athletes. I know it takes place with other people, but I'll just use athletes as an example. Like with this, I didn't get to watch it because I don't have ESPN, but the Last Dance, this whole like Michael Jordan
Yeah.
Chicago Bulls 10-part thing. It's like
Hmm.
as great as I heard it was, Michael Jordan was like an executive producer on this thing. So of
Was
course
he?
it's like, yeah. So it's so many. And Tom Brady's got a big thing coming out, I think, in 2021, of course. And he had this Tom versus Time thing on Facebook a couple years ago. And so it was like he was sort of a, nothing creatively at least got through him. Maybe they'll throw a little unflattering thing in here or there, but it's not going to be this turning a great documentarian loose or a great reporter loose to let them find anything. It's still going to be funneled through
Hmm.
them. It's about them, and yet they still have the levers of the ultimate uh, dispersal of the message.
Right. Right. And you think about, the where investigative journalism is happening now, and there are a lot of people doing that good work. But it probably, I always think of places like um, Vice or ProPublica, or podcasts that are going in and reporting on people and stories that the administration right now would prefer to keep hidden. I'm thinking of the Pulitzer-winning episode of This American Life. So there,
Yeah.
you do have to seek out that work, and maybe it's more of a self-selecting audience who really wants that right now. I'm watching The Last
Yeah.
Dance very, very slowly through this season.
I've heard it's great.
And
Yeah.
it's fun. Yeah, yeah. But it kind of makes sense now that you say it, that Michael Jordan's an executive producer. There are so many just stunning shots of him like flying across the court, flying through the air.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, being upwards of 20 years removed from that run that they made in the late 90s. Like, it was just, you kind of forget, different era of ball, but also you
Hmm.
start to forget how brilliant, he was and that team around him was. It was, pretty
Right.
spectacular to kind of live
Yeah.
through it. I was in high school when all that was happening. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Same.
with respect to writing the book, I don't think a lot of people like, not that they don't like to talk about it, they just don't get a chance to, like the sometimes the sacrifice that goes into writing a book, researching a book. You had, I suspect, during the heavy drafting of this book, you basically had a newborn, um a toddler. So it was like, what sacrifices did you have to make to fulfill and manifest the dream of this book, and thread it into your life so you could get the work done?
Yeah. Coming out of this, I really came out of this thinking I could have done this under two conditions, like one, left totally alone, that, then you actually have the space and the time, or with somebody who is like actively involved in making it happen for you, which, I would be my husband for sure. I started this, I don't think this book took so long to come together, Brendan. And uh, it started out where my husband and I weren't even living in the same place. And then, yes, by the time it was finished, we were very much living in the same place and had a child. Um, I also went through periods of working full time for a nonprofit, working part-time as a, a freelance writer, editor, workshop teacher. Um, and what helped was being able, before the baby came along, to get up and work from 5 to 7 each morning. And I didn't necessarily get a ton of work done during each one of those stretches, but just showing up was definitely made things move forward. I think the writer Ann Patchett I remember reading a very reassuring interview with her where she said, you'd be amazed at how much can happen in just 1 hour a day. And it's true. That doesn't go for the research. The research took some travel, and that was logistically kind of challenging. But you have to do it. There's no way around it. And now, I would be really interested in hearing how people are doing it now in the age of COVID, where going to archives and traveling for research is really constrained. Um, I'm I'm working on something where I've ended up going through a lot of archival documents digitally, and it's possible, but it changes the whole nature of the work, and I'm definitely finding it less fun. I will say that so my circumstances, and I didn't have to work a full-time job through the whole drafting and publishing of the book. When I was I'm not sure how far I was into my pregnancy when I left my full-time job, threw myself into finishing the book because there was a contract for it and it advanced at that point. And then by the time the baby was born, I sent it to a freelance developmental editor for a few weeks. So, and stepping away from it at that point and being completely absorbed in something completely different was very good for the book. When I got back to it, it just seemed like an alien form. I was like, who did this? And you can really attack it with fresh eyes. Um, that said, my eyes were not fresh because I was waking up every couple of hours through the night, and the intervals in which I could work were just really short. So, now that the book is out, um, I'm very much in the situation that everyone who's published a book is in, which is that you think this is like an artifact of what I could do at this point in my life, and there's a whole host of improvements and edits and transformations I would make if I were still working on it now. But all in all, I would say to anybody who's thinking, well, there's no way I could do a book project and have a kid at the same time. You can. They go together. You need support.
What would you identify as something a big lesson or two you learned from the whole scope of citizen reporters that you're eager to apply to your next one to maybe make that book as richer, or even the process more seamless and a little less hair graying, if you will?
hmm I honestly think taking the time that it takes, um, that, yeah, it's sort of discouraging to think back and think, wow, a better part of 5 or 6 years went into this thing. And now it's out, and now I need to figure out what I do for the rest of my life. But I kind of come back to where I was when I first started writing seriously, which is that writing is going to be a part of my life. It's not going to be necessarily what puts food on the table, but in order to do these books right, to do them painstakingly, to do the amount of research that I think is necessary, to make them stand the test of time, there's really no way to rush it or to I guess I haven't found a way to optimize. I'm trying to be more organized this time around, in terms of how I'm keeping my notes. But at the end of the day, I really am committed to a major element of my work being the fact that it doesn't skip over anything.
Yeah, we're in such a life hack culture that like optimizing in and of itself is just a word that is just so fraught with stress and if you're not fully optimized, you just feels like you're shitting your life away or something. It's like
hmm
it's like, you know what? It's going to take as long as it's going to take. Your career is going to it's going to slow down and speed up at its own pace. There's no way you can sort of life hack your way to some Xanadu of publication bliss. It's
Completely.
just going to happen when it's going to happen at its own pace, and you have to surrender to that.
Yes, exactly. I really, I think I was always someone who wanted to cut out a stage in the process. Who thought, like, really, do you need that many drafts? Like, just get it out there. But it has really, I think the one kind of level of self-knowledge that I can say I've come to in middle age is my first drafts are so bad.
Right. Yeah.
And in a way, that, I hope listeners understand that conversation is a kind of first draft, and that there, I know you're going to edit this, but that really, like, my work is heavily revised and edited and goes through many, many drafts. So, and it's necessary. That's all part of it. So I think that I have to accept it's just, you're going to look at it and think, no, and do it all over again, and hopefully be okay with it. I think you've done some level of justice to the story by the end.
Right, and I think Seth Godin, who's a hero of mine, and one of a great blog posts that he's wrote of late, and it's something he's harped on for years, is that really what separates a pro writer or any of the writers who actually get work done and amateurs is that the pro, for lack of a better term, we'll just use that. They are the most comfortable writing bad words and bad sentences. And they're okay with that shitty first draft, as Anne Lamott would say. And even you saying, my first draft is awful. Up through the 10th draft are quite bad. And it's okay to go through dozens of drafts too. It's not just 4, as John McPhee might say. So it's like just being comfortable with bad work, because the bad eventually gets good. But that's kind of what separates the pros from the amateurs.
Right. I think, and maybe just older people who who depend on the words going out there to keep money coming back from maybe when it's the stakes are lower earlier on.
Absolutely. Well, very nice. Like, Stephanie, I want to be mindful of your time. Your book is wonderful. I went through it a lot. Just breezed through it. I had a whole lot of fun getting to know McClure, Tarbell, and Steffens, and all the other jokers in between those covers. So it was a whole lot of fun. A great book. Where can people get more familiar with you and your work? Find the book, and maybe find you online if they're to get more familiar with your work.
Sure. So I have a website. It's just my first name, last name, stephaniegorton.com. And I am on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, though really sporadically. But I kind of encourage anyone to just get in touch directly via the website if they're so interested. And Brendan, thank you so much. Thanks for reading the book. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Of course, pleasure was all mine. Damn, that was a good time, a toe-tapping good time. Thanks to Scrivener for sponsoring the show, along with Casualty of Words, the writing podcast for people in a hurry. Go subscribe to it. Thanks to Stephanie. Go pick up a copy of Citizen Reporters, and if you like the show and episodes like this one, share it with your network and consider leaving a kind review on Apple Podcasts. We're 9 away from 100, and it must be, because if you can't do, you interview. See ya!